Hey everyone, welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. Got a great guest on today, and I'll describe him briefly. He's a father first, a designer, business leader, and enabler of teams second, and a wannabe DJ third. He currently leads the design team at Dropbox across all creative disciplines: brand, product design, research, content design, and ops. Please join me in welcoming Alastair Simpson. Welcome.
Thanks, Thomas. Appreciate you having me on. And hello, everyone.
Ready for 20 questions?
Sure, I'm ready for 20 questions.
Okay, question one. Tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
I think you just gave a little bit of it away, but I always start with I'm a father to two young kids, Frankie and Buddy, who will listen to this. They're 6 and 9 right now. And so that's the first thing that I do is I'm just trying to help them be curious and creative humans and be good citizens in the world, because I think we need that in the future. For work, as you mentioned, I run brand and product design at Dropbox, but I kind of break that out a little bit. And I like to say that, my goal really is to help teams and people and teams solve complex business and customer problems through the lens of design. And so what that really means is challenging long-held assumptions, asking hard questions, reframing what's possible through the designer's kind of toolkit. And then, with solutions, I have a very heavy emphasis on craft, quality, and exercising taste and judgment to solve those problems in a really meaningful and enduring way.
Awesome. And just a note for our audience, if you guys are interested in C-suite episodes, check out the episode with Roger Vanderheed or Eric Quint. Question two, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
I think I've got, if it's okay, I might have two. The first piece is, there's a little quote I like to use, like I try to play life on easy mode. What that means is that I spend a lot of time optimizing kind of my day-to-day habits, my surroundings. So small things, but those small things kind of ladder on top of each other so that I can spend most of my time focusing on solving those really hard problems. And I think many people don't necessarily do that. They play on the opposite, which is hard mode. So that takes time and focus away unnecessarily on things that can be easily automated or the things that you don't need to think about, right? And the second piece of knowledge that I think I picked up very early in my life, and one of my first jobs was actually in a call center, and that was just the power of communication and that the ability for that to be so pivotal in my life and in my career, and how you can really share amazing stories with people and you can really move people through different emotions through the power of story and communication, and just how effective you need to be that. You need to be at that in all aspects of your life. I think that was something that I really learned early on that was very, very important.
I love that. I love that about storytelling. You guys should look out for the next episode with Rachel Botsman. She's a great storyteller as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. Question three, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
I think, I have thought about this a little bit recently. Somebody said to me, should I go work in product or on the business side of tech? But for me, I love the design side because of the focus on craft, taste, design and execution. And then also being a leader of teams, I just love helping people and teams solve those complex problems. And I think there's a little bit of magic in that kind of creative fog where many problems at first seem really intractable, but then it's amazing how, when you start jamming and working through problems with really smart human brains, you can get to solve very complex problems in really meaningful ways. And a really great example of that, at Dropbox, I co-led our shift to remote work for about 2 years. And many people, the shift to remote work was dealt with by HR, but I actually co-led this with HR. And it was very uncommon to have a designer doing this. But at Dropbox, we wanted to apply human-centered design to the problem and design a better way of working, because we didn't think it was just a get Zoom and you've kind of figured it out, or shift to hybrid and you've figured it out. And so 2 years later, we've got a very unique model called Virtual First. It's very different to most companies, but our employees are the happiest and most productive that they've ever been. And so that's what gives me joy, Thomas, being able to solve very difficult problems in really meaningful ways for people.
Perfect. Some people struggle with number four, but the question is, what does your future look like?
I mean, my answer to that, Thomas, I hope to be able to look back, and when I look back in the future, myself today and even in the past, and I hope that I've grown and developed as a person, because I don't want to look back and see that I got all of my decisions right. Because if I look back and I got everything right, that would mean zero learning for the future. And so I hope that my future looks creative, curious, full of adventure, and, to make the most of this one precious life that we all have.
Yeah, that's great. Number five, we say is unique to this show. And the question is, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
I mean, I've mentioned already, I'm fortunate that I get to live and work anywhere really for Dropbox, anywhere in North America. And I think, the notion of place for me, it's a difficult one, because I think objects and emotions can help you feel grounded when you're in any place. And so for me, I grew up in England, but I then traveled for 3 years around South and Central America, Southeast Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. I then lived in Australia for 12 years, and I've now been in California for 6.5 years. And so that notion of home or place being or home being a specific place is not something that really resonates with me. And as I mentioned, I feel lucky that I can live and work from anywhere and contribute meaningfully to my work and also to my personal life. And so I think the key for me around place is more about being intentional with the time that I have in person, so in a specific place, or if I'm remote, so virtual, which I think is also a place. I think that's the most important thing that you can do, is be really intentional about your time and make sure that you're making that time as meaningful as it can be.
Great. And if you had to start from the beginning, what advice would you give your former younger self?
Well, I'm trying to live this out. Like I've set up a Gmail for my kids, which they don't have access to, but I send each week a little bit of wisdom to that Gmail. And so when they hit 18, I intend to turn that Gmail over to them. And I'm hoping that that contains a ton of advice that they would have wanted when they were starting, or that I would have wanted when I was starting out when I turned 18. And so that's actually the gift that I'm trying to give to my children. So I don't think there's one specific piece of advice, but if you have to pin me down on one, it would be the comment I made before. It's about being really intentional with your time, because time is so precious. It's the most precious resource that we have. And so being super intentional with it is very important.
What's a day in your life like?
It's usually starts, I'm an early riser at like 5:30, 5:45. I pretty much always train, go exercise between 6 and 7 a.m. I never used to be a morning person, but my kids forced me into that. I then try and meditate in the morning, sometimes only for a short 10 minutes. I'm not a very long meditator, but I'm trying to get better at that. Quite often in the morning before 9 o'clock, before work really starts, I will also do remote time with my kids. My kids actually live in England. And so I spend remote time, very intentional time. So doing homework or stories or playing chess with them online. So I do remote time with the kids, and then work through 9 through 1 is generally reserved for meetings at Dropbox. And that's kind of the kind of in real time collaboration. But then outside of 1 through 5, we actually encourage a non-linear workday. And so I actually use a lot of the afternoon time for very focused, deep work on specific problems. And so that's usually what that looks like. Then end of the day, I try to do yoga about 3 times a week, and then eat before 6 because I try to do intermittent fasting. And then the evening is reading. Usually I don't own a TV, so I try not to watch too much TV, and then try to get to bed between 9 and 9:30. So that's kind of a day in the life.
Nice. And you kind of mentioned around number 8, but the question is, lifelong learning is a popular topic. How do you stay up to date?
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I how I try to stay up to date is maybe sounds counterintuitive initially, but I really try to minimize the inputs that I take in, because I do think that we have way too many pieces of content and advice coming at us nowadays, and we are more distracted than we have ever been as a human, as humans. Now, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to learn. I have a growth mindset. I'm a really curious person, and I'm keen to learn and evolve. So, but what I try to do is be really discerning with the inputs that I take in. And so for me, I just have a few weekly email newsletters. They're focused on product, tech, and personal growth. And I only have like a handful of those. I'm a serial unsubscriber from things to keep my inbox light. And then I have a few friends, mentors, and coaches whom I trust to give me great advice or links to really great advice when I really need it. And so that's how I try and stay kind of up to date. But I think lifelong learning is, as a topic, is super important.
And 9 is tools. What tools do you use? Do you use digital and analog tools?
Yeah, I've mentioned a few times, but I work remotely a lot from various different places. But I try to keep my setup as simple and minimal as possible. And so, for me, we're talking today on my laptop, but I have a very simple standing desk that I stand at most of the day that just folds up into a shelf when I'm not using it. And then I have a microphone and that's it. I don't have lots of pieces of tech. So it's really, really simple. I've been a Dropbox user since the very start, and this is genuine. I've had an account since about 2008. It's one of the reasons that I now work here. But I actually use that to store everything important in my life and keep it with me wherever I am because I travel a lot. So I rely on that. And I'm also now using a new product from Dropbox called Dash to search all of my cloud applications because that's very useful because things are becoming more scattered. Outside of that, it is quite simple. I use Gmail. I take notes on a very simple text editor. I have a Moleskine with a pencil. And that's kind of it. Like when I'm traveling around, like I try to keep the amount of things that I have to an absolute bare minimum and keep the most important things with me.
Great. And halfway number 10, how do you deal with work-life balance?
Well, for me, I actually like to invert this, Thomas, and I don't know if other people have coined this, but I prefer to talk about life-work balance because I think, I led the first question. I talked about being a father, and I think, we often try and assign identities by the work that we do, but actually we're a person, we're a human before we're whatever we are at work. And so for me, it's more about life-work balance. And I mentioned in my day in the life, it's like, there is clear time for exercise, clear time for the kids. And I think it's very important to set boundaries. Having previously not set great boundaries and kind of burned myself out, I realize now the importance that you have to be looking after and focusing on yourself first and foremost. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to produce the best work for the company you're working at or for the people that are important in your lives. And so that for me is the most important thing.
And number 11, if you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
You mentioned I'm a wannabe DJ. I'm not very good. My friend Solomon is trying to teach me, but I'm not that great yet. I would probably, though, prefer to be a professional soccer or football player. I actually played professional soccer until 16, and then I played semi-professional until 37. I wasn't quite good enough, though, but that's probably what I would ideally like to be doing if I wasn't doing what I'm doing now.
What would you not like to do with your career?
Stand still. It's that simple. Like I don't like standing still.
Do you have a favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Yeah, there's a couple that I really like. And based on the prior answers, these probably won't be surprises, but there's a lovely quote from Mary Oliver: to pay attention, this is our endless and proper work. And then another from Simone Weil: attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. And I think the reason I like these as kind of favorite quotes is that I'm trying to be much more present and mindful in everything that I do, from trying to meditate regularly. I don't always get there, but trying, to how I craft the work that my team's doing and how I try to craft my workday with real intention, to how I engage with my children, to how I show up in my marriage. So there's a real focus on giving people and important people in my life the most attention that I can. So that's kind of the key.
And a least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
I'll pick one that just kind of signify it and then I'll explain it. It's like the quote that you often hear in the corporate world, like, let's double click on that. The reason I don't like that is that it signifies to me kind of the epitome of kind of corporate jargon, which there's tons of corporate jargon out there, which really, it's a lot of words that don't mean anything, right? There's no substance. And I think when you get into jargon or corporate speak, it can get in the way of being really authentic and human. And it's also not very intellectually or emotionally honest. And it just acts as this mask or this cover. And as a result, what needs to be said often isn't. And so sadly, that gets in the way of doing really great work, which is really what I'm trying to do with my life.
One word to describe yourself. What word do you choose?
Resilient.
What keeps you up at night?
I think, I mean, it's an obvious one, but it's the climate and climate change and the impact that we're all having on it, even with a lot of efforts that individuals and many organizations are trying to do. But that keeps me up at night because we're really seeing the impact that that's having on with weather change. And I fear for everyone's children, but also for my kids growing up. I don't know what the climate is going to be like for them in 20, 30 years. And they're still going to be very young, which I think is incredibly sad.
Do you have a dream you're chasing?
It's to be as curious and as adventurous as I possibly can with this life that I have.
What inspires you?
Again, it's an obvious one, but I'll give it a bit more context. My children inspire me, but the way that they inspire me is just how fearlessly they approach things that many adults have a lot of fear around. And I think, that creativity that children innately have is just quite magical. And unfortunately, adults, that kind of gets educated out of us. And I really hope that certainly for my children and everybody else's children, that we don't educate out of them the creativity and the fearlessness and the curiosity that they naturally have, because I think we'll need that to solve some of the problems like climate change that are really affecting us right now.
Great. And any advice you'd like to share?
I'm trying to think of something different from all the pieces of advice, but maybe I'll just talk a little bit more about that communication example. I think I often talk to, whether it's a designer or an engineer or a marketer, and they're often talking about how do they elevate their career or their trajectory, or even in their personal life. But they're often focused on many things that I would call, say, hard skills in their discipline. So it might be for a designer using Figma or the latest prototyping tool. But often the thing that I talk to people about and the advice that I give them is to really focus on how you're communicating just in general, but the value of your work, the work that you're doing, because communication, I think, can make or break any project that you're working on, no matter how good the work can be. Sometimes you have to communicate it really effectively. And so that would be the piece of advice to share.
And number 20, how can our listeners keep tabs on you? What's our call to action today?
It's basically LinkedIn is the way. I mentioned about minimizing input, so I'm not on many forms of social media, and I don't post that often on LinkedIn, but people can certainly message me on LinkedIn. If you do send me a note to ask a question, please ask a question and don't just hit send invite with no context. And the call to action, be curious, be creative, everyone.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much for being on. Such a privilege to have someone of your caliber on the show. And I think our listeners, our frequent listeners, will really enjoy this one. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Thomas.